When Willowbrook Gardens HOA hit 68-year-old Marine veteran Samuel Hayes with a crushing $15,000 fine for installing a medically required wheelchair ramp, board president Victoria Sterling didn't just smile. She laughed. "You picked the wrong neighborhood to play victim, old-timer. We maintain standards here." The sound of her designer heels echoing off polished marble mixed with the mechanical whir of his wheelchair as she strutted away, leaving behind the suffocating scent of her 300 per bottle perfume. But here's what that platinum blonde suburban dictator had no clue about. Samuel wasn't some helpless pensioner counting food stamps. He was the ghost owner of 387 properties throughout their exclusive community, nearly 52% of the entire development, purchased methodically over 18 years, while neighbors assumed he was just another broke old soldier scraping by. His real estate empire was worth $63 million, and for the past 2 years he'd been systematically documenting every corrupt move the HOA board made. By tomorrow morning, the woman who crushed a disabled war hero would learn she'd been collecting her salary from the very man she tried to destroy. And Samuel was about to show 743 households what justice looks like when you underestimate the wrong veteran. What happens when entitled HOA tyrants target someone who spent decades in military intelligence? Share your predictions below. Drop your location in the comments. Your HOA horror story might be featured next. Samuel Hayes never wanted to become a neighborhood power broker, much less a silent landlord to half his community. 2.5 years ago, when his beloved wife Catherine lost her battle with lung cancer, she squeezed his calloused hand in that sterile ICU and whispered through labored breaths, "Promise me you'll protect the people who can't protect themselves, Sam." The antiseptic hospital smell mixed with her fading lavender perfume would echo in his nightmares forever. After 28 years as a Marine intelligence officer, his spine destroyed by roadside bombs in Afghanistan, he thought Willowbrook Gardens would provide the peaceful retirement he'd earned. Just him, his weathered 2009 Toyota Camry, and discount grocery runs. Then his wealthy brother died unexpectedly, leaving him $3.1 million and a moral crossroads. Watch corporate predators devour vulnerable families in his new community, or use his inheritance to fight back. Catherine always said the person who talks the least observes the most. So Samuel did what Marine intelligence trained him to do. He became invisible. Operating through Hayes Property Management LLC, he systematically acquired every foreclosure, estate sale, and distressed property that hit the market. Not for profit, but to keep housing affordable for teachers, firefighters, and retirees like himself. Willowbrook Gardens sprawled across 743 homes, with brutal $425 monthly HOA fees and regulation books thicker than military field manuals. The morning air carried diesel exhaust from endless landscaping trucks, while industrial air conditioning units hummed like electronic wasps, drowning out any natural bird songs. Those glossy monthly newsletters felt expensive because they were funded by relentless violation fines that legal aid worker Jennifer Rodriguez had been quietly investigating for months. Enter the true villain, Victoria Sterling, 5-term HOA president, and the type of real estate mogul who treated her gleaming white Mercedes G-Wagon like a weapon of intimidation. Surgically perfect blonde bob, designer workout clothes that cost more than disability checks, married to County Commissioner Richard Sterling. Her specialty was systematically targeting elderly and disabled residents with microscopic rule violations, while completely ignoring identical problems on board members' properties. Jennifer had explained this pattern to Samuel once near the community mailboxes, describing how her paralegal background taught her that HOAs couldn't legally engage in selective enforcement, targeting specific residents while ignoring identical violations elsewhere. Most people never learned they had legal rights, which was exactly how Victoria preferred it. When Samuel installed his wheelchair ramp, doctor-ordered, city-permitted, completely legal, Victoria pounced like a predator sensing wounded prey. "Unauthorized architectural modification," she declared with theatrical authority, while completely ignoring her own illegal fence extension that violated setback requirements by 8 inches. The emergency board meeting was pure political theater. 5-0 vote for maximum penalties, with only Jennifer Rodriguez attending as a concerned observer. "You picked the wrong neighborhood to play victim, old-timer." Victoria's words bounced off the community center walls as residents shifted uncomfortably in their folding chairs, the metallic creaking mixing with their collective shame. Samuel said nothing, just nodded slowly and rolled away, his silence more menacing than any angry outburst could have been. But what nobody witnessed was this. Later that evening, as crickets chirped through his open kitchen windows, and streetlights cast ominous shadows across his table covered with property deeds, Samuel made a secure phone call. "Jackson," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of nearly 3 decades in military intelligence. "It's time to execute Phase 1. Pull the Hayes management files. All 387 properties." "Yes, I understand the implications." Catherine would have wanted justice, not just revenge. Jennifer Rodriguez approached him at the local Whole Foods the following morning, whispering between the organic produce aisles. "They're systematically violating their own charter. I've been documenting everything for months." The irony was absolutely delicious. She had no idea she was offering legal advice to the man who secretly owned over half the neighborhood, including the townhouse where her elderly mother lived rent-free. The familiar sound of gravel crunching under Samuel's wheelchair had taken on new meaning. Each morning roll through these pristine streets was now reconnaissance. Every property he'd protected, every family he'd helped, every corporate landlord he'd blocked from exploiting vulnerable residents. It was all building toward this moment when a decorated intelligence officer with $63 million in local real estate would teach Victoria Sterling what real power actually looked like. Victoria Sterling didn't waste precious time celebrating her victory. She weaponized it immediately. Within 72 hours, her Community Excellence Initiative launched systematic harassment, disguised as neighborhood improvement. Daily violation notices flooded Samuel's mailbox like incoming artillery. Driveway staining, $400. Holiday decorations past deadline, $650. Excessive bird feeding activity, $270. The rusty screech of his overstuffed mailbox echoed through the quiet morning air as neighbors hurried past with guilty expressions etched on their faces. But Victoria's greed made her reckless. She instituted a retroactive $750 architectural review fee for all exterior modifications, specifically targeting Samuel's approved ramp. Her nephew Craig became the official HOA enforcement photographer, documenting Samuel's property twice daily with the dedication of professional surveillance. Then the systematic accidents began. Monday morning, HOA landscaping crews accidentally sprayed industrial herbicide on Samuel's prized rose garden, Catherine's favorites. The caustic chemical stench burned his nostrils as he watched 3 decades of careful cultivation wither and blacken. Tuesday, the cable company mysteriously cut his internet during his crucial telehealth appointment. Wednesday, a sprinkler malfunction flooded his entire driveway, the sound of rushing water mixing with Victoria's barely concealed laughter as she personally inspected the damage. Infrastructure maintenance issues, she explained to concerned neighbors with Oscar-worthy fake sympathy. These aging utility systems affect everyone eventually, unfortunately. Samuel recognized psychological warfare tactics when he experienced them firsthand: sleep deprivation, financial pressure, social isolation, classic enemy strategies he'd studied extensively in Kandahar. The only difference was Victoria wore designer athleisure instead of military fatigues. But here's what she completely missed. Marine intelligence had taught patience and meticulous documentation over emotional reactions. While Craig photographed violations obsessively, Samuel photographed violations right back. Victoria's pristine fence, 8 inches over the legal setback line, the treasurer's unpermitted deck expansion, 0 city approvals obtained, the secretary's home business signage, direct violation of commercial activity restrictions. Jennifer Rodriguez, observing from her kitchen window, initially thought grief had driven him to obsessive behavior. Then she recognized his evidence collection strategy. "You're building a selective enforcement case," she whispered at the post office, the morning air thick with coffee aromas and commuter traffic sounds. "Intelligence gathering beats emotional reactions every time," Samuel replied with a smile that never reached his eyes, the same expression he'd worn during classified briefings in Kabul. Jennifer knew he was absolutely right. State law prohibited HOAs from targeting individuals while ignoring identical violations elsewhere. Ironclad legal precedent with devastating financial penalties for corrupt boards. But her courthouse research revealed something much more sinister. The HOA's legal expenses had exploded 400% in 24 months, with massive billings for enforcement consulting by companies sharing board members' personal addresses. The real twist came when Jennifer's son suddenly received a $3,500 fine for his basketball hoop, the identical hoop that had been specifically approved 4 years earlier during his previous board review. She realized Victoria wasn't just targeting Samuel anymore. She was systematically attacking anyone who showed him basic human sympathy. The message was crystal clear: support the disabled veteran and face financial destruction. But Jennifer had seriously underestimated Samuel's counter-strategy. That evening, she overheard fragments of his conversation with Jackson, document the expanding retaliation. Yes, she's targeting secondary subjects now. Perfect evidence for the federal civil rights complaint. Jennifer felt ice water in her veins. Federal? What exactly was Samuel planning that required federal intervention? By week 4, his accumulated fines totaled $26,800, and Victoria escalated to pure, calculated malice. Adult Protective Services received an anonymous tip about an elderly veteran in cognitive decline, living in dangerous, unsafe conditions. The investigator found absolutely nothing wrong. Samuel's house was immaculate, his mind razor-sharp, but the public humiliation was the entire point of the exercise. The final violation notice arrived with cinematic drama. Victoria personally delivered the foreclosure threat, posing for professional photographs next to his mailbox like a conquering military general. Pay every penny or get evicted, old man. This community demands standards. But Jennifer noticed Samuel's reaction wasn't despair or panic. It was satisfaction, like a chess grandmaster whose opponent had just walked directly into an unavoidable checkmate position. He folded the letter with careful precision, added it to his expanding evidence file, and wheeled toward his house humming an old Marine Corps hymn. That night, through her open bedroom window, Jennifer caught fragments of his phone conversation. Yes, Jackson. 30-day disclosure period starts tomorrow. They just triggered the federal complaint. No, let them keep digging their own graves deeper. Something told her Victoria Sterling had just made the biggest mistake of her perfectly manicured life. The foreclosure threat hit local news faster than Samuel anticipated, but not remotely the way he'd hoped. Victoria leaked her version first, controlling the narrative completely. Disabled veteran refuses to follow reasonable community rules. The newspaper photo showed his house with a giant red arrow pointing at his wheelchair ramp, captioned, HOA holdout challenges standards. The morning paper crackled in his weathered hands as he read over bitter coffee, the taste matching his darkening mood perfectly. Channel 9's morning show featured Victoria as the reasonable community leader, facing down an entitled troublemaker who expected special treatment. Some people believe military service entitles them to ignore rules that protect everyone's property values, she said with practiced victim sympathy, dabbing crocodile tears while studio lights illuminated her professional highlights. But consistent standards protect every homeowner's investment equally. This media victory emboldened her sabotage campaign beyond anything Samuel had realistically anticipated. Tree service crews accidentally dropped massive branches on his Toyota Camry. The sickening crunch of splintering safety glass mixed with theatrical apologies from the work crew. Pest control companies mistakenly sprayed industrial-grade chemicals near his air intake, forcing him to seal every window during the hottest week of the summer. Street cleaning equipment malfunctioned daily, soaking his front porch with water that reeked of diesel fuel and decomposing organic matter. But Victoria's psychological warfare reached true military precision levels. Private security patrol cars idled outside his house for hours every night, radio static crackling through humid darkness. Motion-activated floodlights aimed at his bedroom windows triggered every 20 minutes, flooding his sleeping area with harsh white light that made rest impossible. Large men wearing official HOA uniforms inspected his property daily, their heavy boots grinding gravel as they peered through windows with barely concealed intimidation tactics. The bureaucratic assault was her masterpiece of systematic torture. False complaints to the health department about rodent infestation, building inspector visits for structural violations that didn't exist, fire marshal inspections for emergency access problems. Each required exhausting documentation to disprove wearing him down like ocean waves against sandstone cliffs. Then Jennifer Martinez discovered the true scope of their criminal operation. Her Freedom of Information Act requests revealed that Richard Sterling had approved $1.2 million in no-bid city contracts to companies owned by his extended family network. The paper trail wound through 6 shell companies, all receiving payments for work never performed or dramatically overcharged beyond market rates. "They're not just stealing from HOA residents," she whispered to Samuel behind the public library, surrounded by the musty scent of aging books and the distant hum of ventilation systems. "They're stealing from every taxpayer in the county." Samuel's calm response shook her to her core. "Catherine always taught me to follow the money trail. I've been following it for 24 months through every shell company and fraudulent invoice. Jackson isn't just my property attorney, he's preparing federal racketeering charges with the FBI." The revelation hit Jennifer like a physical blow. While everyone saw a helpless victim being systematically destroyed, Samuel had been conducting counterintelligence operations with military precision and federal coordination. Every harassment incident, every staged accident, every illegal act of retaliation documented and catalogued like enemy war crimes for future prosecution. But Victoria wasn't finished with her escalation strategy. Someone loosened Jennifer's wheel lugs after she spoke, supporting Samuel at the city council meeting. Her mechanic's words haunted her nightmares. "Another 10 miles and you would have lost the wheel completely. Could have killed your entire family." The harassment campaign had evolved into attempted murder. The breaking point came when 79-year-old Mrs. Chen received a $7,500 fine for garden gnome violations. Her ceramic decorations had sat peacefully in the same spots for 18 years until HOA pest treatment accidentally killed her prize-winning jasmine plants, the ones that perfumed 6 blocks every spring with heavenly fragrance. Jennifer found her sobbing in the driveway, clutching the violation notice with trembling, arthritic hands. "Cannot pay this money," Mrs. Chen whispered through broken English. "Social security not enough for survival. They take my house away now." That image of an elderly immigrant being terrorized by suburban fascists finally shattered the neighborhood's paralyzing fear barrier completely. 15 households gathered secretly in Jennifer's living room, sharing horror stories that sounded like war crimes. Tom Peterson revealed HOA contractors had mysteriously destroyed the memorial oak tree planted for his fallen son. The room fell into stunned silence as he described finding the tree in pieces, with no explanation provided whatsoever. But then came Samuel's perfectly timed counter-strike revelation. "Tomorrow morning," he announced quietly to the assembled group, "Jackson files comprehensive federal civil rights charges. Every incident becomes evidence in a massive racketeering case. Conspiracy to deprive constitutional rights, systematic community terrorism, organized financial fraud. We're not fighting a homeowners association anymore. We're dismantling a federal criminal enterprise." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. "Federal charges? Criminal enterprise?" Jennifer stared at her quiet neighbor, suddenly realizing she'd been watching a decorated military intelligence officer execute the most sophisticated civilian sting operation in suburban history. Outside her windows, security patrol headlights swept across her living room like prison searchlights. Tomorrow, those same guards would be running from federal agents, instead of terrorizing elderly veterans and immigrant families. Victoria Sterling thought she was systematically destroying one helpless old man. She had absolutely no idea she'd been walking straight into a trap designed by someone who'd spent nearly 3 decades hunting much more dangerous enemies than suburban white-collar criminals. Victoria scheduled her victory celebration disguised as an emergency meeting to finalize foreclosure proceedings. Channel 9 received exclusive behind-the-scenes access to document her decisive community leadership in action. Her morning radio interview dripped with false regret and manufactured sympathy. Sometimes protecting property values requires making difficult decisions about problem residents. The community center reeked of industrial disinfectant mixed with nervous perspiration as residents filed in under fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry hornets overhead. Victoria had strategically packed the front rows with her most loyal supporters and board allies, but tonight felt distinctly different from previous meetings. More people than usual. Hushed conversations that died instantly when board members walked past. She opened with theatrical flair, clicking through a slideshow of problem properties with Samuel's house featured prominently in multiple slides. Charts showed declining home values, legal precedents, enforcement statistics, all carefully designed to justify destroying one disabled veteran for the supposed greater good. Community standards protect everyone's financial investment equally, she declared to rolling cameras, her voice carrying the practiced authority that had intimidated hundreds of residents into fearful compliance over the years. But then, the room's entire energy shifted like atmospheric pressure before a devastating thunderstorm. Jennifer Rodriguez stood up slowly, manila folder clutched in her trembling hands. "Mrs. Sterling, I have serious concerns about systematic selective enforcement patterns and significant financial irregularities in these proceedings." Victoria's perfect mask slipped for one microscopic moment, pure panic flickering across her features, before professional composure returned like armor. "That kind of inappropriate speculation has no place in legitimate community governance proceedings," she replied sharply. "According to official city records," Jennifer continued, her paralegal training steadying her increasingly confident voice, "your husband approved $1.2 million in no-bid contracts to companies owned exclusively by your extended family. Meanwhile, board members have identical violations that were never cited or penalized." The murmur rippling through the packed crowd sounded like distant thunder building toward a storm. Victoria tried desperately to regain control of the narrative. "These baseless conspiracy theories have absolutely no place in legitimate community governance." That's when Samuel Hayes rolled his wheelchair to the microphone with deliberate precision. The room fell into absolute silence as he positioned himself at the podium, somehow making his medical equipment look like a military command bridge rather than a disability aid. When he finally spoke, nearly 3 decades of Marine authority filled every corner of the space. "Mrs. Sterling, 3 years ago, my dying wife asked me to protect people who couldn't protect themselves." His voice carried the weight of absolute moral certainty that only comes from a lifetime of service. "I kept that sacred promise by quietly purchasing 387 properties in this community through Hayes Property Management LLC. That's 52.1% of Willowbrook Gardens." The silence was so complete, you could hear the ventilation system cycling air through the building's ductwork. Victoria's face drained of all color as the mathematical reality hit her like a physical assault. 52.1%, she whispered, the number falling from her lips like a death sentence being pronounced. "While you've been systematically terrorizing disabled veterans and elderly immigrant widows," Samuel continued in conversational tones, "I've been documenting every illegal act for federal prosecutors. Not for revenge, but for justice." The room exploded as residents processed the earth-shattering revelation. Their quiet, apparently defeated neighbor wasn't a victim at all. He was the majority owner of their community, and apparently some kind of federal informant conducting a sting operation. Victoria tried to flee toward the exit, but her escape path was blocked by a man in a crisp navy suit who'd been sitting quietly in the back row throughout the entire evening. "Victoria Sterling," he announced clearly, displaying federal credentials for all cameras to record. "You're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and domestic terrorism." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the community center as news cameras captured every moment of her very public destruction and humiliation. Richard Sterling bolted for the emergency exit and crashed directly into 2 FBI agents who'd anticipated his predictable escape route perfectly. His arrest was significantly less dignified, face first into industrial carpeting, while hyperventilating from sheer panic, the sour stench of fear sweat filling the air around him. But the revelation that completely shattered everyone's understanding of reality came from Special Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. "Mr. Hayes contacted federal authorities 20 months ago about systematic civil rights violations targeting the most vulnerable residents. His evidence gathering has enabled the most comprehensive RICO prosecution against HOA corruption in federal law enforcement history." Jennifer stared at Samuel with dawning comprehension washing over her. Every harassment incident, every staged accident, every moment of calculated humiliation. He'd endured systematic torture while secretly building a federal case that would completely destroy the entire criminal network forever. The patient intelligence officer had executed the longest undercover operation in suburban American history. Mrs. Chen wept with overwhelming relief as federal agents explained that all fines were completely void and full restitution would come directly from seized criminal assets. Tom Peterson stood up and rendered a crisp military salute, one veteran honoring another's heroic service to their shared community. As federal agents secured evidence and arrested additional conspirators, the community center buzzed with shocked conversations among neighbors. Residents who'd pitied Samuel's apparent helplessness now understood they'd been witnessing a master strategist dismantle domestic terrorists with surgical precision and infinite patience. "How long have you been planning this operation?" Jennifer asked, as organized chaos swirled around them. Samuel's answer carried the weight of 3 years of deliberate suffering. "Since Catherine's funeral," he replied quietly. "She always said quiet people observe everything, and I observed a cancer that needed cutting out completely. Sometimes you have to let criminals think they're winning until they commit enough federal crimes to earn life sentences without possibility of parole. The taste of justice," Martha would have said, was infinitely sweeter than revenge could ever be. Dawn broke over Willowbrook Gardens with the rumble of federal vehicles and the metallic slam of car doors echoing through suburban silence that hadn't been broken by anything more threatening than garbage trucks and school buses for decades. Black SUVs lined streets normally filled with nothing more exciting than morning joggers and dog walkers. The rich aroma of fresh coffee from a mobile FBI command unit mixed with diesel exhaust and the nervous perspiration of residents who'd gathered on sidewalks, whispering behind trembling hands as they watched their quiet neighborhood transform into a federal crime scene. Special Agent Sarah Chen emerged from the HOA administrative offices, carrying banker's boxes that rustled with the weight of incriminating evidence collected over months of investigation. Her grim expression told the complete story before she spoke to assembled news crews and federal prosecutors. "What we've uncovered represents systematic community terrorism disguised as legitimate neighborhood governance. The revelation that made residents' blood run cold was the discovery of the Sterling Targeting Database, a detailed digital spreadsheet ranking every household by vulnerability factors and profit extraction potential." The sound of papers rustling filled the morning air as Agent Chen read selected entries aloud, each name hitting neighbors like physical blows to their collective psyche. Mrs. Chen, priority target number 4, limited English proficiency, socially isolated, estimated extraction potential, $18,000 over 36 months. Tom Peterson, target number 9, grief-compromised judgment, military guilt exploitable through memorial desecration, maximum psychological pressure recommended. Jennifer Rodriguez, target number 14, paralegal knowledge makes organizationally dangerous if mobilized, neutralized through direct family threats and financial intimidation. Then came Samuel's entry, and the crowd fell into stunned silence except for the distant electrical hum of federal generators. Priority target number 1, disabled Marine veteran, recently widowed, potentially substantial hidden wealth, socially isolated, systematic harassment approved for maximum extraction, $75,000 plus. Utilize medical equipment as psychological leverage point. Subject statistically unlikely to resist due to advanced age and physical disability factors. The clinical calculation behind 3 years of systematic torture hit everyone like ice water in their veins. This wasn't HOA overreach or bureaucratic incompetence. It was organized crime that had studied their psychological weaknesses, like predators selecting the most vulnerable prey from a herd. Jennifer Rodriguez felt her knees buckle as the horrifying truth sank in completely. Every harassment incident, every punitive fine, every staged accident had been meticulously planned with military precision by criminals who'd researched their victims' deepest psychological vulnerabilities, like enemy intelligence officers. Federal forensic accountants revealed a money laundering operation sophisticated enough to impress international cartel organizations. 15 shell companies across 6 states, fraudulent landscaping contracts totaling $1.2 million, phantom legal services billing $485,000 for work never performed or documented. Richard Sterling's municipal connections had funneled an additional $2.4 million in taxpayer money to family-controlled businesses through corrupt no-bid contracting schemes. The scope of evidence was overwhelming to process. Thousands of emails coordinating harassment campaigns, recorded phone conversations, planning staged accidents, detailed psychological profiles of every targeted resident. The Sterling network had documented their own crimes with arrogant thoroughness, creating an absolutely ironclad federal prosecution case. But the community's psychological impact assessment painted the most devastating picture of systematic domestic terrorism. Federal psychologists had interviewed over 300 residents, documenting widespread PTSD symptoms, chronic anxiety disorders, clinical depression, and social withdrawal behaviors. Mrs. Chen had stopped tending her beloved garden after the jasmine destruction incident. Tom Peterson rarely left his house except for essential grocery runs. Children no longer played outside freely. Parents lived in constant terror that normal childhood activities might trigger expensive violation notices. We've documented identical psychological profiles, Agent Chen explained to assembled media, in communities terrorized by international organized crime syndicates. The Sterling criminal network wasn't just stealing money systematically. They were deliberately destroying human lives for pure financial profit. The smell of fear had literally permeated the entire neighborhood for years. Residents had lived in constant hypervigilance, jumping at doorbell rings, checking mail with trembling hands, avoiding eye contact with neighbors who might be reporting to HOA informants. Then came the revelation that justified every moment of Samuel's deliberate suffering. Mr. Hayes's intelligence-gathering operation prevented this criminal network from expanding into 22 other communities, Agent Chen announced, her voice carrying newfound respect and admiration. His personal sacrifice potentially saved thousands of families from identical systematic terrorism. Federal asset seizure had already frozen $6.8 million in criminal proceeds. Every luxury vehicle, vacation property, and hidden investment account would be liquidated for victim restitution payments. The Sterling family would leave federal prison with nothing but standard-issue prison uniforms and lifetime federal supervision. But it was the property ownership revelation that finally made complete sense to devastated residents. Samuel hadn't just been buying houses randomly, he'd been systematically denying the criminal network access to their most profitable targets. Every foreclosure he prevented was a vulnerable family saved from financial destruction. Every corporate landlord he blocked was a community preserved from systematic exploitation and abuse. Jennifer stared across the street at Samuel's modest ranch house, finally understanding the true scope of his heroic sacrifice. For 3 years, he'd endured systematic torture while conducting the most sophisticated counterintelligence operation in suburban American history. Every apparent defeat had been strategic positioning. Every public humiliation had been evidence gathering. Every single day of harassment had brought professional criminals one step closer to life sentences in federal prison. The quiet Marine veteran hadn't just survived organized crime, he'd completely destroyed it using patience, precision, and the kind of strategic thinking that had protected American communities in much more dangerous places than their suburban neighborhood. The sound of federal evidence bags crinkling in the morning breeze carried the promise that justice, delayed but never denied, was finally coming to Willowbrook Gardens. By noon, Samuel's modest living room had transformed into a federal coordination center that would have impressed his old Marine Intelligence Unit commanders. Bankers' boxes lined every available wall, 4 laptops hummed on his dining room table, and a detailed criminal activity timeline stretched across an entire wall like a military situation room briefing display. The rich aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the ozone scent of electronics working overtime, as the most unlikely team in federal law enforcement history assembled around his kitchen table. Jackson Wellington spread federal asset seizure documents across the scratched wooden surface, his expensive 3-piece suit looking oddly formal in the domestic setting. The beauty of comprehensive RICO prosecutions, he explained to the assembled group, is complete financial recovery. Every stolen dollar, every fraudulent contract, every criminal asset gets seized. The Sterling family won't have bus fare when they're released from federal prison in 40 years. Jennifer Rodriguez reviewed victim impact statements with the methodical precision her paralegal training had instilled, though her hands still trembled slightly as she read accounts of systematic community terrorism. Mrs. Chen's statement, professionally translated from Mandarin, described 3 years of sleepless nights and panic attacks triggered by simple doorbell sounds. Tom Peterson's testimony, detailed the psychological warfare of watching his son's memorial tree deliberately destroyed while feeling completely powerless to respond or seek justice. Agent Chen coordinated with federal prosecutors via encrypted video link, her laptop screen showing assistant U.S. attorneys from the Southern District taking detailed notes as she outlined the comprehensive scope of federal charges. "We're seeking life sentences without parole for the primary defendants," she confirmed, satisfaction evident in her professional voice. "Domestic terrorism, racketeering, conspiracy, systematic civil rights violations. This case will set legal precedent for decades." But the real genius of Samuel's long-term strategy became clear when Frank Mueller, the retired IRS investigator who lived 6 blocks away, joined their planning session. His forensic accounting background had revealed the tax evasion component that would add another 15 years to each sentence. "They didn't just steal from the community systematically," Frank explained, while adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "They failed to report $3.7 million in criminal income to the IRS. The Internal Revenue Service considers that a very personal insult to America." The texture of federal paperwork felt fundamentally different from HOA violation notices. Heavier, more substantial, carrying the genuine weight of constitutional authority, rather than suburban tyranny disguised as governance. Each document represented months of investigation, thousands of hours of federal agent time, and resources that completely dwarfed anything a community homeowners association could possibly muster against them. Jennifer's daughter, Michelle, had driven up from Dallas overnight, bringing her cybersecurity expertise and a secure communication system that would make military intelligence units envious. "We're creating a completely transparent governance platform," she explained, while connecting encrypted tablets for each street representative. "Every financial transaction, every board decision, every resident complaint gets logged with digital timestamps and electronic signatures. No more secret meetings or hidden agendas ever again." The community healing aspect of their comprehensive planning felt equally important as the criminal prosecution component. Dr. Maria Santos, a trauma counselor specializing in community terrorism recovery, had volunteered her professional services after seeing the shocking news coverage. "Systematic intimidation creates lasting psychological damage that requires specialized treatment," she explained to the group while reviewing evidence-based therapy protocols. "Recovery requires rebuilding fundamental trust in community institutions and personal safety." Samuel's military precision showed in every single detail of the restoration plan. Temporary governance would operate under strict federal oversight, with monthly financial audits and completely public reporting. Community meetings would be professionally recorded and live-streamed for maximum transparency. A victim assistance fund seeded with seized criminal assets would provide counseling services and property repair assistance for anyone who'd suffered under the Sterling regime of terror. But perhaps the most satisfying element was the comprehensive educational component. Professor Elizabeth Martinez, a constitutional law expert from UT, who specialized in community legal rights, had volunteered to conduct workshops on federal civil rights protections. "People desperately need to understand they have strong federal protections against exactly this kind of systematic harassment," she explained, via secure video conference. Her extensive law library visible behind her, in a cluttered office that smelled of aged leather and academic coffee. The sound of federal helicopters circling overhead reminded everyone that this wasn't just neighborhood drama or petty disputes. This was a national security case that had attracted serious attention from Washington, D.C. Congressional staffers had been calling Jackson's office throughout the morning, inquiring about potential federal legislation to prevent similar community terrorism networks from developing in vulnerable neighborhoods elsewhere. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Samuel's quiet strategy had not only completely saved Willowbrook Gardens, but potentially protected thousands of communities across America from similar criminal operations. Federal task forces were already investigating suspicious HOA activities in 18 other states, using the Sterling case as their investigative template and legal framework. As afternoon shadows lengthened across his living room, Samuel surveyed the organized chaos of federal justice in coordinated action. Catherine's photograph smiled down from the fireplace mantelpiece, surrounded by Marine Corps commendations and community service awards that suddenly made perfect sense in their proper context. She would have absolutely loved seeing their quiet suburban neighborhood become the epicenter of the most significant community civil rights case in federal history. Tomorrow evening, Jackson announced, as the day's planning session concluded, we present the complete restoration plan to the community. Federal oversight, transparent governance, comprehensive victim compensation, and a replicable model for democratic community management that other neighborhoods can adopt nationwide. The smell of victory, Samuel realized, was infinitely sweeter than the taste of revenge could ever have been. Through patience, precision, and the kind of strategic thinking that had served American interests around the world, one quiet Marine veteran had not only survived systematic terrorism, but transformed it into a catalyst for community healing and federal reform. The criminals who'd thought they were systematically destroying a helpless old man had inadvertently created the blueprint for protecting vulnerable communities across America from their own predatory schemes. Federal custody couldn't contain Victoria Sterling's desperate fury. From her detention cell, she orchestrated one final campaign of terror using criminal contacts her federal investigators hadn't yet discovered in their ongoing investigation. The sound of metal doors clanging shut in federal lockup mixed with hushed contraband phone conversations as she activated a network of violent associates who owed the Sterling family substantial favors from years of municipal contract corruption and political protection. "I don't care what it costs us," she hissed into the smuggled cell phone, her perfectly manicured nails now chipped and dirty from federal processing procedures. "Destroy everything and everyone. Make them wish they'd never crossed the Sterling family." By Tuesday morning, the sabotage had escalated far beyond simple property damage into attempted mass murder. Jennifer Rodriguez woke to the acrid stench of gasoline and melting plastic filling her bedroom. Someone had firebombed her Honda Accord in the driveway, the explosion shattering windows in 4 neighboring houses. Federal agents arrived within minutes, but the message was crystal clear: testify against the Sterling network and face consequences that no insurance policy would ever cover. The twisted metal frame of her car continued smoldering as fire department foam mixed with morning dew, creating a toxic slurry that reeked of petroleum products and pure fear. Frank Mueller's home invasion attempt came at 2:30 a.m. 3 armed men with crowbars and extensive criminal records prying at his reinforced back door while he cowered in his bedroom, frantically dialing 911 on his cell phone. The scraping sound of metal on wood mixed with his terrified whispers to the emergency operator. Only his neighbor's motion sensor lights and his barking German shepherd prevented what federal investigators later confirmed was a planned assault designed to destroy critical IRS evidence and intimidate a key federal witness. But Samuel's attempted assassination was the most brazen act of domestic terrorism in the entire case. The sniper's bullet shattered his kitchen window during his routine morning coffee ritual, embedding in the wall exactly where his head had been positioned moments before. The sharp crack of high-velocity rounds mixed with the crash of breaking glass as Samuel instinctively dropped his wheelchair below window level, 30 years of military training overriding the shock of nearly being murdered in his own home by professional killers. Federal response was immediate and absolutely overwhelming. FBI tactical teams surrounded the neighborhood within 12 minutes, their black tactical uniforms and military-grade equipment transforming quiet suburban streets into an active war zone. The sound of helicopter rotors mixed with shouted tactical commands as federal agents secured a 4-block perimeter and launched the most intensive domestic terrorism investigation in the region's documented history. Agent Chen's voice carried deadly authority as she briefed assembled news crews and federal prosecutors. The Sterling criminal network has escalated to attempted murder of federal witnesses and law enforcement personnel. These acts of domestic terrorism will be prosecuted to the absolute fullest extent of federal law, including death penalty charges where legally applicable. The community's terror was palpable and overwhelming. You could literally smell it mixing with morning coffee and suburban lawn sprinklers as residents huddled behind locked doors, afraid to walk to their mailboxes or start their cars without checking for explosive devices left by professional criminals. Children were kept home from school while federal bomb disposal teams methodically swept every vehicle, mailbox, and garden shed for booby traps left by experienced mercenaries. But Victoria's criminal network hadn't counted on Samuel's counterintelligence capabilities. Hidden security cameras he'd installed months earlier captured everything with crystal clarity: license plates, facial recognition, even audio recordings of criminal coordination meetings. His military intelligence background had taught him to anticipate escalation, and every attack was documented with courtroom-quality evidence that federal prosecutors would use to add terrorism charges, carrying life sentences, without any possibility of parole. The psychological warfare reached its absolute peak when Mrs. Chen's granddaughter was followed home from school by men in a black sedan. Their threats, whispered in broken Mandarin, roughly translated to severe consequences for elderly women who testified against powerful people. The 9-year-old's tears mixed with her grandmother's terrified sobbing as federal marshals established protective custody for 4 generations of an immigrant family whose only crime was living in a neighborhood targeted by organized criminals. Federal wiretaps revealed the true scope of criminal desperation as intercepted calls, detailed plans for chemical attacks, additional bombings, and systematic assassination of every witness who could testify about the Sterling Network's extensive crimes. The recorded conversations would later be played in federal court as evidence of conspiracy to commit mass murder in service of covering up simple HOA fraud. But here's where Samuel's strategic patience paid off in ways that stunned even experienced federal investigators. Every attack, every threat, every act of terrorism was exactly what he'd been hoping would happen. Not because he wanted to be victimized, but because each escalation added decades to federal sentences and attracted resources that would completely destroy the entire criminal network forever. His decades of military intelligence experience had taught him that desperate enemies make fatal mistakes when they feel cornered and threatened. Let them keep digging their own graves deeper, he told Agent Chen during a secure briefing at the federal command post, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd faced much more dangerous enemies than suburban criminals. Every bomb, every threat, every bullet adds another life sentence to their federal convictions. They're destroying themselves with each desperate escalation. Jennifer watched from her temporary federal safe house as tactical teams secured evidence from her destroyed car, finally understanding that Samuel hadn't just survived the Sterling Network's attacks. He'd systematically manipulated them into committing federal crimes that would ensure they never terrorized another community again. The quiet Marine veteran was still 3 strategic moves ahead of professional criminals who thought violence was their trump card against American justice. Federal detention couldn't contain Richard Sterling's network of criminal associates either. From his cell in the Metropolitan Correctional Center, he made one final desperate gambit, using connections that stretched back to his decades of municipal contract corruption and political influence. The metallic echo of prison phones mixed with whispered conversations as he activated sleeper assets, contractors, security guards, and off-duty police officers who owed their livelihoods to Sterling family corruption. "Kill every witness," Richard rasped into the contraband phone, his city councilman facade completely stripped away to reveal the career criminal underneath. "Burn everything to the ground. No witnesses, no evidence, no community left to testify against us." By Thursday morning, Willowbrook Gardens resembled an active war zone. Professional arsonists torched the federal command post at 3:30 a.m., the massive explosion rattling windows for miles, as evidence boxes containing 8 months of investigation work erupted in flames that painted the dawn sky orange and black. The acrid smell of burning plastic mixed with melting electronics created toxic clouds that forced complete evacuation of the entire neighborhood, while hazmat teams contained chemical contamination from destroyed federal evidence. Federal response was swift and absolutely overwhelming. FBI Director Patricia Morrison personally flew in from Washington, D.C., establishing Willowbrook Gardens as a federal crime scene under military protection authority. The sound of Marine Corps helicopters filled the air as heavily armed federal agents in full tactical gear established security checkpoints at every neighborhood entrance, transforming suburban streets into something resembling occupied enemy territory. But the criminals' final assault targeted the most vulnerable residents with calculated precision designed for maximum psychological impact. Mrs. Chen's house was hit with military-grade explosives at dawn, the blast so powerful it shattered windows 6 blocks away and left a smoking crater where her rose garden had bloomed for 20 years. Only the fact that federal agents had evacuated her to protective custody the night before prevented mass murder charges from being added to the growing federal indictment. Tom Peterson wasn't as fortunate. The improvised explosive device hidden under his pickup truck detonated when he started the engine for his weekly grocery run. The sound of twisted metal and broken glass mixed with his agonized screams as federal medics rushed him to trauma surgery, with burns covering 70% of his body. The Vietnam veteran who'd survived enemy mortars and jungle warfare nearly died in his own driveway at the hands of domestic terrorists. Jennifer Rodriguez's federal safe house was breached by professional killers who'd cut power to the entire city block before attempting to execute every witness who could testify about the Sterling Network's extensive crimes. The gunfight between federal marshals and hired assassins lasted 18 minutes, the sound of automatic weapons echoing through suburban darkness as terrified neighbors huddled behind bathtubs and called loved ones to say goodbye. Federal investigators later determined that the Sterling Network had hired the same mercenary outfit that provided security for international drug cartels, men with military training and zero conscience about murdering elderly Americans to protect criminal profits and political corruption. But Samuel's assassination attempt was the most audacious act of domestic terrorism in the entire case. Chemical weapons deployed through his home's ventilation system at Tucson AM, military-grade sarin gas that would have killed everyone within a 4-block radius, if not for sensors that federal agents had installed after the sniper attack. The evacuation sirens wailing through the darkness, mixed with the rumble of hazmat vehicles as specialized military units contained what FBI Director Morrison later described as an act of domestic terrorism comparable to foreign enemy attacks on American soil. The community's terror was absolute and overwhelming. Federal psychologists documented mass trauma symptoms as residents huddled in evacuation centers, afraid to return to homes that had become active battlefields between organized crime and federal law enforcement. Children drew pictures of explosions and helicopters instead of flowers and rainbows. Elderly residents developed stress-induced medical conditions that required immediate hospitalization. But here's what the criminals hadn't anticipated at all. Every escalation was being monitored in real time by military intelligence assets that Samuel had quietly activated through his Marine Corps connections. Satellite surveillance, phone intercepts, financial tracking systems, the full apparatus of American counterterrorism was now focused on destroying a suburban criminal network that had declared war on federal authority. The same resources used to track international terrorists were now documenting every movement, every communication, every hidden asset of the Sterling enterprise. Federal grand juries in 4 states handed down sealed indictments against 63 conspirators, including corrupt police officers, city officials, contractors, and mercenaries. RICO charges, terrorism statutes, murder conspiracy, the full legal arsenal of American justice was being deployed against domestic enemies who'd made the fatal mistake of targeting a decorated military intelligence officer. Agent Chen's final briefing carried the weight of federal fury and constitutional authority. The Sterling Network has committed acts of domestic terrorism that rival foreign enemy attacks on American communities, she announced to assembled media and federal prosecutors. Federal prosecutors are seeking death penalty charges for conspiracy to commit mass murder in service of covering up municipal financial crimes. As federal agents secured the smoldering remains of what had been a peaceful suburban neighborhood, Jennifer realized that Samuel's strategic patience had accomplished something historically unprecedented. He'd manipulated professional criminals into committing federal crimes so heinous that they'd face execution for trying to cover up HOA fraud and municipal corruption. The quiet Marine veteran hadn't just survived systematic terrorism, he'd turned it into evidence that would ensure his tormentors never terrorized anyone again. The federal courthouse in downtown Houston had been transformed into a military fortress. Concrete barriers channeled crowds through metal detectors, while Apache helicopters circled overhead, their rotor wash mixing the scent of jet fuel with the nervous sweat of 3,000-plus spectators who'd come to witness the conclusion of America's largest domestic terrorism prosecution in federal history. The sound of tactical radios crackled between FBI agents positioned on every rooftop as international news crews broadcast live coverage to 80 million viewers worldwide. Samuel Hayes arrived in an armored federal motorcade that stretched 6 city blocks, his wheelchair-accessible van surrounded by Secret Service agents and federal marshals carrying automatic weapons. The contrast was striking. A humble Marine veteran, in his dress blues, flanked by the full protective power of American justice, rolling toward a courthouse where domestic terrorists would face the consequences of targeting the wrong community. Inside the packed courtroom, the atmosphere crackled with tension, so thick you could taste it, mixing with the metallic scent of security equipment and the ozone smell of electronic surveillance devices monitoring everything. Federal Judge Patricia Morrison presided over proceedings that would set legal precedents for prosecuting community terrorism, her black robes carrying the constitutional authority of American law against organized crime. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland personally prosecuted the case, his opening statement carrying the weight of federal fury and moral authority. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendants didn't just steal money from a homeowners association, they declared war on American communities, targeting our most vulnerable residents with systematic terrorism designed to destroy innocent lives for pure financial profit. The evidence presentation lasted 6 hours and felt like watching a detailed military briefing on enemy operations. Wall-mounted displays showed the criminal network's organizational structure, 63 conspirators across 4 states, connected by lines representing murder plots, bombing conspiracies, and assassination attempts. Each defendant's photo was accompanied by federal charges that read like wartime atrocities: domestic terrorism, conspiracy to commit mass murder, chemical weapons attacks, mercenary assassination attempts. But the moment that silenced the entire courthouse came when Agent Chen played intercepted phone recordings of Richard Sterling ordering the chemical weapons attack on Samuel's home. "Kill everyone in a 5-block radius if necessary." His voice echoed through courtroom speakers with crystal clear audio quality despite being recorded from federal prison. "I don't care how many children die in the process. No witnesses, no survivors, no evidence left standing anywhere." The jury's faces showed physical revulsion as they processed the casual discussion of mass murder designed to cover up municipal fraud and HOA corruption. Federal prosecutors had documented that the planned sarin gas attack would have killed over 1,200 residents, including dozens of children, to eliminate testimony about stolen community funds. Then, Samuel took the witness stand, and the entire courtroom fell into absolute silence, except for the quiet hum of recording equipment capturing every word. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying 30 years of Marine authority and moral certainty, "when Catherine died, she made me promise to help people who couldn't help themselves. I've kept that sacred promise by enduring 3 years of systematic terrorism while gathering evidence that will protect American communities from organized crime forever." His testimony revealed the complete scope of his heroic sacrifice in devastating detail. Every harassment incident, every staged accident, every death threat had been carefully documented while he posed as a helpless victim. Federal investigators had provided him with military-grade surveillance equipment that captured 20 months of criminal activity in courtroom-quality video evidence. The defendants thought they were systematically destroying one disabled Marine veteran, Samuel continued, his words carrying the weight of absolute moral authority earned through decades of service. They never realized they were creating evidence for the most comprehensive domestic terrorism prosecution in American federal history. The property ownership revelation that had shocked Willowbrook Gardens gained new meaning and significance in federal court. Samuel hadn't just been buying houses randomly, he'd been systematically denying the criminal network access to vulnerable families while gathering intelligence on their expansion plans across multiple states and communities. But the mic drop moment that would be replayed on news broadcasts for decades came during cross-examination. Defense attorney Richard Steinberg, desperately trying to salvage his clients' lives, accused Samuel of entrapment and vigilante manipulation of federal law enforcement agencies. Samuel's response was delivered with the calm precision of someone who'd spent 3 decades defending American interests against much more dangerous enemies than suburban criminals. Counselor, I didn't entrap your clients into committing domestic terrorism against innocent American families. I simply refused to be terrorized by criminals who thought an elderly Marine veteran would be an easy target for systematic exploitation. Your clients chose to escalate harassment into attempted murder, property damage into bombing campaigns, and municipal fraud into chemical weapons attacks against civilian populations. Those were their choices, not mine. He paused, letting the weight of federal evidence settle over the courtroom like a shroud of justice. I served this country for 30 years, defending American communities from exactly the kind of systematic terrorism your clients inflicted on innocent families. The only difference between foreign enemies and domestic criminals is the uniform they wear while threatening American lives and constitutional rights. The federal jury deliberated for 52 minutes before returning guilty verdicts on all 1,247 counts of domestic terrorism, racketeering, conspiracy to commit mass murder, and civil rights violations. Judge Morrison's sentencing was swift and final. Life without parole for Victoria and Richard Sterling, death sentences for the mercenaries who'd attempted chemical weapons attacks, and federal supervision for every conspirator who'd survived to see eventual release. As federal marshals led the defendants away in chains, the sound of their shackles clanking against courtroom marble mixed with the quiet sobbing of family members who'd finally learned the true scope of their loved ones' crimes against their own community. Samuel's closing statement to the packed courthouse would become the defining moment of American community justice. The criminals who thought they could terrorize American neighborhoods learned that quiet people observe everything, document everything, and when we finally act, we act with the full authority of federal law and constitutional protection behind us. Every stolen dollar has been recovered and returned. Every terrorist will spend life in federal prison, and every community in America is safer because these predators will never threaten innocent families again. The standing ovation lasted 9 minutes and could be heard 6 blocks away. 2 years later, Willowbrook Gardens had become something unprecedented in American suburban history, a community that had not only survived organized terrorism, but transformed it into a model for democratic neighborhood governance that inspired federal legislation in all 50 states. The morning sun cast long shadows across streets that once echoed with the sound of federal helicopters, now filled with children's laughter and the gentle hum of neighbors working together in community gardens that bloomed where command posts once stood. The Samuel Hayes Community Protection Act passed Congress with unanimous bipartisan support, establishing federal oversight for all homeowners associations and criminalizing the systematic harassment tactics that had terrorized thousands of American neighborhoods. The rich aroma of Catherine's memorial roses, replanted with community volunteer labor, mixed with fresh coffee from the new community center that federal victim compensation funds had built on the site of the old HOA administrative office. Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient Samuel Hayes had become an unlikely symbol of quiet American heroism. His story featured in documentaries, congressional hearings, and military academies where his intelligence-gathering techniques were studied as masterclass examples of civilian counterterrorism operations. But he remained the same humble Marine veteran who rolled through his neighborhood each morning, now greeting dozens of neighbors who understood they owed their freedom to his 3-year sacrifice and strategic patience. The community healing had been remarkable to witness and participate in. Dr. Santos's trauma counseling programs had helped residents process their systematic terrorization while building stronger social bonds than most neighborhoods ever achieve. Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, now 11 years old, led tours for visiting community delegations, explaining in perfect English how federal protection had saved her family from criminals who targeted them for being immigrants. Tom Peterson, recovered from his bombing injuries with scars that would last forever, had become Samuel's closest friend and fishing partner. Their weekly trips to Lake Conroe involved more storytelling than actual angling, two veterans sharing quiet understanding of how ordinary Americans could survive extraordinary evil through patience, precision, and faith in eventual justice. The financial restitution had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Federal asset forfeiture had recovered $6.8 million in criminal proceeds, but civil penalties and punitive damages brought total victim compensation to $18.7 million. Every household received full reimbursement for illegal fines plus federal interest, while community improvement funds had transformed Willowbrook Gardens into a showcase for what neighborhoods could accomplish when freed from criminal exploitation. But the ripple effects extended far beyond one Texas suburb. The Catherine Hayes Community Justice Foundation, funded by Samuel's book royalties and federal grants, had provided legal assistance to 1,147 communities across America fighting similar criminal enterprises. Jennifer Rodriguez, now the foundation's executive director, coordinated with FBI field offices nationwide to identify and prosecute HOA terrorism before it could destroy vulnerable families. International observers had studied the Willowbrook Gardens model for combating organized crime that targeted residential communities. UN human rights investigators had documented how American community terrorism was being exported to other countries through corporate consulting firms, making Samuel's intelligence-gathering techniques valuable for protecting vulnerable populations worldwide. The annual Community Freedom Festival drew visitors from across America to celebrate the triumph of democratic values over criminal intimidation. Local food trucks served barbecue that filled the air with mesquite smoke, while children played on playground equipment funded by seized criminal assets. The sound of live music mixed with conversations in 8 languages as immigrants from around the world came to see the neighborhood that had proven ordinary Americans could defeat any terrorist organization. Samuel's daily routine remained unchanged. Morning coffee, afternoon property inspections, evening calls with federal prosecutors, tracking similar cases across the country. But now his wheelchair route included stops at the community garden where Mrs. Chen grew vegetables for the monthly neighborhood potluck, the memorial bench where Tom Peterson fed ducks that had returned to the retention pond, and the small library where Jennifer's daughter had established a digital democracy center, teaching other communities to organize against criminal exploitation. The texture of success felt fundamentally different from revenge, warmer, more sustainable, carrying the satisfaction of building something positive rather than simply destroying something negative. Catherine would have loved seeing their quiet neighborhood become a beacon of hope for communities worldwide, proving that patient Americans could outlast any criminal enterprise through strategic thinking and federal cooperation. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation was personal. Samuel had found family among neighbors who'd survived terrorism together, shared purpose with federal agents who'd become lifelong friends, and peace in Catherine's memory through service that protected vulnerable people from exactly the kind of predators who'd once seemed unstoppable. As sunset painted the sky, purple over Willowbrook Gardens, residents gathering for their monthly town hall meeting created a scene that would have seemed impossible during the dark years of sterling terrorism. Diverse faces, multiple generations, different economic backgrounds, all united by shared experience of surviving organized crime and emerging stronger through democratic cooperation. Catherine always said the quietest person in the room observes the most. Samuel addressed the packed community center, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd proven that ordinary Americans could protect their neighbors from extraordinary evil. Sometimes it takes patience, sometimes it takes federal prosecutors, but truth and justice always find a way to defeat terrorism. His closing words would be remembered whenever communities faced similar threats. If your neighborhood is being terrorized by criminals disguised as officials, document everything systematically. Contact federal authorities immediately, and remember, they're not actually powerful. They just act powerful until someone calls their bluff with the full weight of American law and constitutional protection. The standing ovation lasted long enough for news crews to capture footage that would inspire community organizers for generations. Share your HOA nightmare in the comments below. We read every story and investigate the worst cases with federal resources. Hit that subscribe button for more stories of ordinary Americans defeating extraordinary criminals. And remember, justice delayed is not justice denied when patient people refuse to surrender their communities to organized crime. Next week, how a small-town librarian exposed a governor's $80 million embezzlement scheme using nothing but public records and determination to protect her community's children from criminals who thought they were completely untouchable. You've been watching HOA Stories, where entitled Karens Get a Reality Check. If this episode gave you secondhand rage or satisfaction, hit that like button. Leave your take in the comments and subscribe so you're first in line for more weekly HOA chaos.